What is the longest anime that you've ever watched? Maybe an exclusive series on Netflix, 8 episodes or less? Maybe a standard 12 episode anime, whether that show ran for only one season or many more seasons after. Or maybe it was something way longer. Well, for me, the longest anime that I watched was The Prince of Tennis, coming in at an honestly crazy 178 episodes. I don't know why I watched this. I've never played tennis, I've never cared about tennis before, but I have been in love. The 5th longest anime I ever watched was Maison Ikkoku. Adapted from the manga by Rumiko Takahashi, Maison Ikkoku is a 1986 anime that ran for 96 episodes. That's a lot. Over that 96 episode journey, we get very familiar with the main character, Yusaku Godai, who right away lets us know he's starting from rock bottom. He can't get into college, he's living in a rundown apartment building, and his love life does not exist. And right when Godai's ready to move out and leave everything behind, in comes the new manager and the other main character of our story, Kyoko Otonashi. A lot will happen between these two over these 96 episodes, and spoiler alert, if you want to see what happens for yourself, you can click off, I won't be mad. Spoiler alert, Kyoko and Godai end up together, but it takes a long time to get to that point. And for me, there are many things that make that ride the most rewarding payoff in romance anime history. Let me tell you what they are. What is a payoff? Well, imagine you have a big test in 1 week and you study every night leading up to it. The day comes, you take the test, and BAM! You ace that shit. That's the payoff. All of that studying paid off, and now your grade bumped up by 0.25%. Congratulations. To get through a long show, you have to like it, but there will always be something that makes you want to quit. The first of those roadblocks that makes Maison Ikkoku so rewarding comes in the form of these 3 characters: Mrs. Ichinose, Akemi Roppongi? I don't know. Akemi, and Mr. Yotsuya. These are the other people living at Maison Ikkoku, and we see how annoying they are right away. They party and drink a lot, most of, if not all the time while Godai tries to study.
Great party.
And to be honest, it's pretty funny to see. For like the first 5 times it happens. Let's look at Mrs. Ichinose first. Mrs. Ichinose is a short middle-aged woman who lives in room 1 at Maison Ikkoku with her son Kentaro and her husband Mr. Ichinose, who we don't know exists until episode 28. Aside from being drunk most of the time and messing around with Godai, she isn't that bad. I'll make the same point about each character. They all start off very one-dimensional, just serving to annoy Godai and Kyoko, but each of them grow to fully fleshed out side characters over time, maybe except for Yotsuya. But in Mrs. Ichinose's case, we see her grow through her son Kentaro. In episode 1 during the manager's welcome party, the second party in the same episode by the way, Mrs. Ichinose gets drunk and starts dancing around the room, all the while Kentaro pulls on his mom telling her to stop. As you probably guessed, this happens a lot. Episode 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, you get the idea. But in between those moments are times where she becomes that loving motherly figure. And the point where I started to change my views on Mrs. Ichinose came in episode 28. The episode starts with a man walking out of Maison Ikkoku and Mrs. Ichinose running after him.
Wonder who that was.
She hands him his lunch for work and starts up a conversation where the others put 2 and 2 together and start realizing that's her husband. That company must be violating human rights. The man is working 200-hour work weeks. We then cut to the late afternoon where Kentaro arrives home from school, his mom doing her own thing. And then Kentaro pulls out a piece of paper for the school festival, telling his mom about the main event and the main focus of the episode, the parent-child 3-legged race. Mrs. Ichinose doesn't care to participate.
Unless the prize is a bottle of booze, of course.
Then her husband comes home and reveals he lost his job. And her response?
I'd rather you were thinking about finding work. You can't expect me to keep stretching out the booze forever.
It's little things like this that make her character so annoying sometimes because drinking is everything she talks about. So much so that Kentaro doesn't even tell his dad about the race and wants Kyoko and Godai to race in place of his parents. Things seem even worse on the day of the festival because the entire game just makes it look like another one of their parties. But Kyoko and Godai, who actually care about Kentaro, seem ready to race. And then Godai rolls his ankle. Now what?
Son, your mother and I made a promise to each other that we'd do whatever it takes to help you today.
Go!
drunk? You've been drinking all day. That's spring water, stupid.
I was smiling the whole time watching these two race for Kintaro. It showed me that Mrs. Ichinose was capable of pulling it together and knew when it was time to tend to other people's feelings. Yes, she partied hard for pretty much the rest of the anime, but she also did so much for everyone at Ikkoku. She also becomes an almost motherly figure to Kyoko, forming a very strong relationship with her, and she also serves as the voice of reason between Kyoko and Godai when any misunderstanding comes up, which happens a lot. And I know what you're probably asking, yeah, they did win the race, so I guess that calls for a drink. Moving on to Yotsuya, he is easily the most annoying person out of the three, and it's not even close. He made a hole in Godai's room just to pop in, like when he's studying, or thinking about his future with Kyoko.
Maybe I should find a part-time job.
I understand the public bathhouse in the next town is looking for a new attendant.
Mr. Yotsuya, how did you get in here?
Later on though, he uses the hole more as a tool to spy on the people Godai brings over, who most of the time are the young girls he's tutoring. That's not a good look. He always drinks and parties with the sole purpose of annoying Godai, which is funny, but it gets to a point where he's only there to be annoying. Like in episode 78, Godai and Sakamoto, his best friend, go out drinking to celebrate the job recommendation Sakamoto used from Yagami's father, landing a job interview at a very good company. Who's Yagami? Godai enters a student-teacher program to work at an all-girls school for a couple weeks, and right away he has trouble controlling his class, but luckily the class rep Yagami helps him out and calms everyone down. Long story short, Yagami has a crush on Godai, starts visiting him at Maison Ikkoku, and tries to steal him away from Kyoko. Months later, after Godai's 2-week program ended, Yagami tricks Godai into tutoring her. He then finds out her dad works at a company he wants to work at, and Godai talks to a drunk Mr. Yagami, securing a job interview at that company, called Mitsutomo. Mr. Yagami doesn't remember this meeting because he was drunk, and now he hates Godai because he thinks he's been using his daughter for a job. And then Godai misses the interview altogether because he was helping a pregnant woman give birth. Okay? Yagami's dad learns about Godai's kind act, gives him a letter of recommendation for another one of his companies, and then that company ends up going bankrupt. Fast forward some more blackmailing later, Mr. Yagami hands over another letter for another company. Godai then rejects, and Sakamoto uses that recommendation to land a job, bringing us to where we are now. Sakamoto and Godai drink the night away at a bar, and then end up going to the Bunny Cabaret, a nightclub that Sakamoto's friend works at. They end up drinking a ton and wake up the next morning in the club where Ioka, Sakamoto's friend, forces them to work to pay off their tabs. And of course, where there's alcohol, there's Yotsuya. Yotsuya sees Godai working and blackmails him into free drinks in exchange for not telling Kyoko, who thinks he's working at a preschool. And to be fair, he was working at a preschool, but he was let go because someone got a more permanent spot and Godai was in the middle of stuff. It's a whole thing. Eventually, Godai makes the same deal of silence with Akemi and Mrs. Ichinose, and you know how that goes. This kind of shit is the only thing Yotsuya does. The constant leeching and use of others around him is the only consistent thing he does throughout the series. Situations like these always lead to more interaction between Kyoko and Godai, like how a worker from the Bunny Cabaret runs away and Godai ends up taking care of her children while she's gone, which shows Kyoko a more responsible side of him. But to make things simple, he always causes the problems but never helps fix the mess he made in the first place. I will say there's a good deed, kinda, that Yotsuya does in episode 92, where he says the love hotel thing with Akemi was a big misunderstanding, which I'll talk about more later. And this leads to Kozue and Godai talking about their own feelings, where Kozue reveals she's engaged and Godai tells Kozue he's in love with someone else. If you want to credit Yotsuya for this, then I'll give it to you, but most of the time, he's not helping anyone at all. But he has a funny accent, so it's okay.
Greetings and salutations.
Welcome back.
What a fine-looking dog. Snowy, have a candy stick on me.
And finally, there's Akemi. She's not that bad. By herself, she doesn't do much besides teasing Kyoko and Godai, but it's when she's with Mrs. Ichinose and Yotsuya, especially Yotsuya, that she becomes a little bit more annoying. Like in episode 4, where the three are making bets on which of the 8 million college entrance exams Godai will actually pass. Or like in episode 47, where she and Yotsuya go into Godai's room to drink his beer just because. These little things lighten up the mood, I guess, and aren't annoying by themselves, but it's just annoying when it happens twice an episode for 5 or 6 episodes straight. Akemi's antics, however, sometimes pushes Kyoko and Godai's relationship forward. In episode 91, Kyoko, who quit as manager a couple episodes earlier, came by to Maison Ikkoku to talk to the new manager. Why did she quit in the first place? Well, it's a little too long to explain here. So Kyoko saw Kozue and Godai kiss each other, making her really angry. Huh? Who's Kozue? Kozue is an old co-worker of Godai's who appeared first back in episode 10. In episode 12, Godai planned to see a movie with Kyoko, but she ends up seeing an opera with Coach Mitaka instead. Godai ends up taking Kozue in Kyoko's place, and somehow the four cross paths, leading to Kyoko thinking about Godai's two-timing ways. Who's Coach Mitaka? So Godai ends up passing one of his entrance exams and finally gets into college. Him and Sakamoto go out to celebrate, and later that night, Godai comes home drunk and screams from the top of his lungs,
I, Yushaku Godai, am in love with Kyoko Otanashi!
Godai wakes up the next day with no memory of what happened the night before, and everyone starts teasing him for it, to the point where he thought he danced around naked when he actually confessed his love to Kyoko. I am not showing a clip of that. Talking to Kyoko, he apologizes for what happened and says it was a joke, leading to a big misunderstanding where Kyoko slaps him and runs off crying. To get her mood up, Kyoko's friends take her to tennis lessons where we first meet Coach Mitaka, who instantly falls in love with Kyoko, making him Godai's rival. Okay? Okay. In episode 88, Kozue tricks Godai into kissing her through some stupid game, and Kyoko sees this happen. Not good for Godai. The next day, Kozue and Godai meet at a cafe where she tells him one of her co-workers proposed to her, but she didn't give an answer to him because she doesn't know what to do. Godai then talks about proposing as well, saying he's gonna propose to the person he loves after done with college. Kozue thinks he's talking about her, and then she runs off before Godai can say he was talking about Kyoko. Do you see what's going on here? This is how problems start. Luckily, Godai explains the reason behind the kiss with Kozue to Kyoko, and the two are back on good terms right before the New Year's Eve party at Chachamaru.
Well, hello there. Come on in, little lady.
Kozue, what?
Godai!
I don't know what to say.
Godai! I want to accept your marriage proposal as well!
Kyoko then quits her job as manager, Godai becomes the new manager in her place, and we're finally caught up to speed. While on the phone with the landlord of Ikkoku, Mr. Otanashi, Kyoko finds out that someone has already replaced her as manager. Wanting to find out who the new manager is, she makes her way down to Maison Ikkoku, but not before stopping at Chachamaru. This is where we see Akemi's craziness actually help out Kyoko and Godai's relationship. Akemi points out how Godai and Kozue will get closer and closer the longer Kyoko stays out of the picture. And to scare Kyoko even more, Akemi says she might actually go after Godai herself, though she says it's a joke after Kyoko leaves. This is the first of many times in the episode where the gang tries to push Kyoko and Godai closer. Later on, Akemi calls Godai from a love hotel to help her pay for the room since she doesn't have the money on her. On their way out, the two spot Kozue, and Akemi takes a chance to push Kozue out of Godai's love life. She wraps herself around Godai and tells him to follow her lead, trying to make it look like they're a couple. And it actually works. But it leads to another misunderstanding, which brings me to my next roadblock. I've watched a few romance anime, and every single one of them had some sort of major misunderstanding. It's like you need something to go wrong to be called a romance anime. Maison Ikkoku has a lot of misunderstandings, and it will get annoying. The first major misunderstanding of the anime is one we brushed on earlier. In episode 8, titled Godai's Unspeakable Declaration, Godai and Sakamoto go out drinking to celebrate the start of their college careers. While at the club, Godai tries practicing how he's gonna confess his love to Kyoko, but the words just won't come out. As the night grows old, Akemi stumbles her way through the doors of Maison Ikkoku drunk. Kyoko and Mrs. Ichinose help Akemi to her room when suddenly a drunken voice can be heard yelling at a trash can.
Oh, what idiot put the goddamn garbage can out here?
Realizing the voice is Godai's, Kyoko runs out and sees him standing on the wall, and we already know what he says next. Kyoko then tells Godai they're going to his room, Kyoko guiding him probably because Godai is too drunk to get there in one piece. Godai takes this gesture the wrong way, puts Kyoko in his arms, and heads to his room. Mr. Yotsuya opens Godai's room to help, and as soon as the door closes, Godai falls asleep, where he wakes up the next day with no memory of the night before. The next morning, the other tenants refuse to tell Godai what happened, giving vague answers and making him think he was dancing around naked when we know what actually happened. And this misunderstanding all leads to a confession between the two, where Godai blames the alcohol and says what he did was just a joke, and Kyoko cries because of his fake confession. Number 1. This synchronized lying from everyone is another reason why the side cast gets unbearable at times. I mean, props to them for coming up with such a believable lie in the first place, but that kind of gets cancelled out by the fact they basically let a drunk Godai take Kyoko up to his room. Bad things could have happened. Number 2. Godai actively avoided Kyoko when he could have just talked to her. This applies more to future misunderstandings, but Godai always takes too long to respond. Here he didn't have much of a choice but to wait. Kyoko ran from him the first time he tried speaking up, then her friends convinced her to go to tennis lessons, which delayed the conversation even more. Godai ends up seeing the manager playing while delivering ice for his job because of course he does. And this leads to a tea date being set up with the tenants and Coach Mitaka at Chachamaru. The topic of Godai's confession comes up where Kyoko chalks it up to a joke, but Godai, with the threat of Mitaka now looming, says he really meant what he said, which is a nice change of pace from his usual behavior. Do not get used to this. 3. They're always so vague. When Godai does decide to talk, instead of directly acknowledging what happened, he just dances around the subject and says things that don't really clear up what he did, or in this case, what he thought he did. I can understand why he doesn't talk about the naked dancing. It's not the easiest thing to bring up, but most of the time, instead of talking, someone just jumps to the extreme. A perfect example of this happening is in episode 30. Episode 30 begins with Kyoko talking to Mitaka about some sort of party he's prepared, where he wonders what Kyoko's answer is. Kyoko finally says yes to his question and apologizes for taking so long. The group of tennis ladies and Mrs. Ichinose behind her faintly hear what they're talking about and assume Kyoko said yes to some sort of marriage proposal. On her way back from tennis lessons, Kyoko bumps into Godai, who's been looking at apartments with their own bathroom. Wondering if he's moving out, Kyoko asks him about it, but he says he's just apartment hunting for a friend. Later that day, while chatting with Akemi and Yotsuya, the two bring up rumors about the manager but don't tell Godai the specifics. Mrs. Ichinose follows up with Kyoko, who mentions something about a marriage, but answers a phone call from Mitaka before she can explain any further. Not wanting to listen anymore, Mrs. Ichinose closes the door behind her. Godai sees Mrs. Ichinose drinking and asks her if the rumors are true, to which she says she wouldn't lie to him. Cap. The next day, Kyoko and Mitaka meet up to confirm her involvement, and after giving the green light, Kyoko heads home, where she bumps into Godai on the way back. Curious if the manager was running errands, Godai asks her what she was doing, where she mentions the meeting with Mitaka. And what happens next might be the dumbest thing in the entire anime.
About the marriage?
Oh, so you've heard then. She's so beautiful.
Goodbye.
This might be the most extreme reaction possible. First off, Kyoko later explains to the tenants how the marriage is actually for Mitaka's sister, and she was only asked to attend the reception. Second, why the fuck would you sprinkle that minor detail while a fucking train is crossing in front of you? Not blaming anyone, you could have just waited a couple of seconds. Third, Godai doesn't hear about this detail and moves out of Maison Ikkoku before anyone can tell him about it. Hell, Kyoko only told everyone after Godai left, so they couldn't tell him anyway. Finally, Godai moves across town, not really, it's like the next street over, into an apartment above a pachinko parlor, but doesn't leave an address behind so no one can reach him. He ends up sharing this place with another couple. He didn't know they would be there, by the way. And since a woman is living there, you can only imagine how much trouble that'll cause when the time comes. But this is a perfect example of little mini misunderstandings snowballing and eventually leading to a massive reaction that alters the course of the story in a big way. I really like this kind of approach because it doesn't come out of nowhere, and it's so dumb that it ends up being more funny than frustrating. But I wish all of the misunderstandings were like that. In episode 60, Mitaka finds himself in bed being ill for the last few days because of his fear. A big part of his character that we haven't talked about yet is his phobia. Coach Mitaka is afraid of dogs. Really afraid of dogs. It all stems back from when he was a kid and had to fetch a ball from a doghouse. The dog came back while he was in there and Mitaka was trapped in the kennel for hours. And this fear is something he hasn't gotten over. I'm skipping around a little bit, but I have to mention Asuna Kujo. Asuna is part of a really rich family and her parents are business partners with Mitaka's uncle. So naturally, the next step is an arranged marriage. There are two problems with this. One, Mitaka is in love with Kyoko, and two, Asuna has 6 dogs. Mitaka started taking steps to get over his fear of dogs even before meeting Asuna, with Akemi, Yotsuya, and Mrs. Ichinose helping out. Both of these potential relationships, Kyoko and Asuna, have a dog involved, but with his eyes set on Kyoko, Mitaka lays out a final proposal, giving Kyoko 1 week to respond. If she doesn't respond to his proposal, or says no, he will go ahead with the arranged marriage. After a visit to Asuna's place where Mitaka failed to break up with her, he sits in bed sick. All of a sudden, his uncle calls to ask if he's still in bed, offering Asuna to come over to take care of him. Denying his request and hanging up in the middle of the conversation, Mitaka gets the bright idea to call Kyoko, hoping she can act as his nurse instead. Putting on a more exaggerated act, Kyoko gets convinced and gets ready to go over the next day. The next morning comes and Godai wakes up a little bit sick and overhears Kyoko getting ready to go over to Mitaka's place. And he's a little bit worried, so he ends up following Kyoko to make sure nothing happens. Kyoko arrives at the apartment building and makes her way in, a brown Pomeranian close behind, following her all the way to Mitaka's apartment. Outside of the building, Godai hears someone calling him. It's Asuna, who's looking for her dog Salad. The dog's name is Salad. Realizing the dog must have followed Kyoko inside, the two make their way up to Mitaka's place. Meanwhile, Mitaka confronts Kyoko about his relationship with Asuna, how he's been backed into a corner and is in love with her instead of Asuna. He moves in closer, and when he confesses his love, Mitaka feels something pressing on his shoulder. He grabs his shoulder, feels around, and all of a sudden, he faints.
Mitaka, what are you? That's my salad.
Godai is heartbroken. This was the worst case scenario for him. Kyoko runs after him to explain herself, but she's too late. Godai leaves Maison Ikkoku for the second time now and stays with Sakamoto at his place. This might be one of the most tolerable and realistic misunderstandings of the entire anime. Sure, Godai knows that Mitaka has a fear of dogs and that there was a dog in the apartment before the door opened, but he was already on edge before learning that Asuna's dog was even missing, so his emotions kind of took over. Everything gets settled over the course of the next few episodes, which is probably one of my favorite mini arcs in the anime, not gonna lie. But this situation shows that not every misunderstanding is completely irrational. But don't worry, I still have one more thing to talk about. There's a lot of things I could have brought up, like the change in English voice actors after episode 36. It's not the biggest change, and if you watch sub, then it doesn't matter at all. I could have mentioned something like how the show looks. If you're not that big into old anime, then the style's just not gonna seem right to you. But honestly, everything I've mentioned so far has been somewhat on the negative side. So I want to end this video on a more positive note. The final thing that makes Maison Ikkoku so rewarding to finish is Soichiro. You might not know who that is. I haven't mentioned that name until now, but Soichiro is a massive part of the story. In episode 6, Mr. Otonashi and Ikuko make their way to Maison Ikkoku to chat with Kyoko before leaving for a family matter. Realizing this is a good chance to make a good first impression on Father Otonashi, Godai brings Ikuko up to his room to keep her company. After talking to Ikuko about her grandfather and Kyoko, the two go down to the manager's room, where Father Otonashi sits in pain after hurting his back. Doubts about getting to their destination arise, but Godai offers to go with them in case Father hurts his back again. Though reluctant to bring him, the group along with Godai make their way to a cemetery, which is not what Godai had in mind. Godai is then asked if he would like to say a few words to the deceased, where he agrees, saying it would be an honor. Not knowing who he's paying respects to, Godai asks,
May I ask who's,
My husband.
husband? You mean as in a spouse?
Kyoko and Soichiro met while he was taking a temporary job as a teacher at her school, which is also the same school Godai worked at during his student-teacher program. Kyoko developed a major crush on her substitute teacher, and after she graduated, the two got married. But after only 6 months of being together, Soichiro died from an accident, leaving Kyoko a very young widow. Even though their time together was short, we have a sense of how much she loved Soichiro. 1. She kept his last name after he passed. 2. Her dog's name is Soichiro, though her husband named him Shiro, but he responds to both. And 3, she won't remarry despite the numerous attempts her parents beg her. Her mom in particular wants her to marry Mitaka because he's pretty handsome and his family is filthy rich. At some point, even Soichiro's dad supports the idea of remarriage, as his son would say it's been too long since Kyoko's been truly happy, but Kyoko won't budge. With the circumstances Kyoko is under, I can only imagine how hard it is to start another relationship. And come on, Godai is the one trying to fill that hole in her life? It's not going to be easy, which makes this whole journey that much more engaging. In episode 33, Godai is finishing up a tutoring session with Ikkoku when Father Otonashi hands him Soichiro's old diary, asking him to give it to Kyoko as it'll mean more to her than to him. For Godai, this is a huge conflict of interest, because if the diary has good memories of Soichiro, that'll make Kyoko's feelings for him even stronger. When she starts going through the diary entries, Kyoko reads page after page detailing the different meals Soichiro ate.
June 8th. A day I don't think I'll forget for the rest of my life.
Morning. Mackerel with miso at home. Met with principal at school. Ate miso mackerel again. Evening. Returned home. Ate the miso mackerel left over from this morning. 3 square meals in one day, and all of them miso mackerel. Can you believe it?
Yeah, I don't know either. This doesn't have the effect that Godai was worrying about, and after flipping through the whole diary, she ends up more worried than happy. One of the pages is missing a postcard from someone Soichiro refers to as her, and Kyoko doesn't know if she wrote the postcard. She calls Father Otonashi to see if he knows where it is. She then tries approaching Godai about the postcard, but he runs away before she can ask him. And it all makes Kyoko feel worse about what the postcard could be. A little while later, Godai, who just came home from college, finds the postcard in his bag and now has to make a choice. Does he give Kyoko the postcard or not? In the end, Godai gives her the postcard and Kyoko learns that she was the one who sent it to Soichiro, making her really happy. To me, this shows a lot about Godai. He's willing to make Kyoko happy through any means, even if he's putting Soichiro before himself. He still respects the relationship they have and is okay with playing the long game if that means seeing Kyoko with a smile on her face. This type of thing happens again a few episodes later. Episode 39 starts with Kyoko cleaning her room of things she doesn't need anymore and finds something lodged in the closet. After washing the mystery item, she realizes it's a rock that Soichiro gave her. This one is a little weird to me, but alright. Kyoko asks Godai if he can find out more about the rock, to which he agrees. Later that same day, Kozue and Godai meet up to go Christmas window shopping, where she finds an expensive cat brooch that would make a good present, but it's obviously out of Godai's price range. Godai is set on getting Kyoko and Kozue both presents, but there's no way he can get the money to make it happen. So he starts working like a madman. Godai takes job after job, all with the goal of making enough money to get presents for everyone. Godai hands the rock off to Sakamoto, who will have one of his friends in the geology department look at it. After a week of hard work, Godai has the money he needs and starts picking out presents for Kozue and Kyoko, buying the cat brooch brought up earlier for Kozue and a bracelet for Kyoko. He also buys a doll for Ikkoku, giving it to her on their last tutoring session for the year. And this act of gift giving reminds Ikkoku of the time her uncle gave Kyoko a gift. And it's actually something we've already seen before.
Who, Soichiro?
Uh-huh. A rock this big. And it had all these weird flakes in it. Come to think of it, that was probably the only thing he ever gave her. Even if he was a geology teacher, it's kind of weird, don't you think?
This rock, the same rock that Godai sent off for analysis, is the only gift Soichiro gave to Kyoko. With the Christmas party at Tachamaru starting soon, Godai leaves to pick up the rock, telling Kyoko and Mitaka he'll meet them there. While waiting at a cafe for Sakamoto, Godai thinks about what to do next. When Sakamoto arrives, Godai asks him about the rock, questioning if they found anything interesting. Sakamoto says they did find something, but he forgot to bring the rock, accidentally leaving it on the train. This news gives Godai mixed feelings, as he thinks it might be for the better, but he ends up searching for the rock with Sakamoto, going through the entire train for any signs of it, all the while Kyoko sits at Tachamaru waiting for Godai to show up. Luckily enough though, the rock wasn't on the train. The two stop by the office for a second time where the worker who led them on the train in the first place says the item was found and is being held at Tokyo Station. But this proves to be another misunderstanding.
Oh man, I'm hungry.
Me too.
How the heck you confuse a rock with a chair anyway?
Well, he did have a pretty thick accent.
At least we tried, huh? At least we tried. People only report it if it's valuable. Who really cares about a rock? You know, if it was me who'd picked it up, I'd have chucked it in the trash.
Godai then finds the rock in one of the trash bins. Great! Now he just has to give Kyoko the rock and finally give her the bracelet.
No, wait! My backpack! Stop! The present's in there!
Oh, great.
This sucks. The bag with Kyoko's present winds up all the way across town in Yotsuya Station, where Godai asks Sakamoto to pick it up and keep it at his place. Sakamoto asks Godai if he needs anything from the bag, and his response?
No, I guess not.
Why would he do this? There's nothing to gain from leaving the bracelet in his bag, but Godai just keeps it moving. He makes his way to Tachamaru, where he slips in the snow along the way, stops to write a card for Kyoko, and then finally arrives at the Christmas party. Godai hands the rock along with the card over to Kyoko, and just as fast as he arrives, he slips through the door where Kyoko follows close behind. Godai goes back to the place he slipped on to pick up the card he dropped, where Kyoko catches up to him. She then talks to Godai about the stone, asking if he knew it was a gift from Soichiro. Godai confirms, and Kyoko thanks him for everything he's done, how she was thinking about him all night long, wondering where he was. Godai then takes off his jacket and pulls it over Kyoko, as she tells him she'll cherish his card forever, and the two walk back to enjoy the rest of the party. I never thought an episode focusing around a rock with green spots would have so much meaning for the story, but it's a perfect example of hard work paying off. And in my opinion, it's this episode where the story begins to shift. The future Godai dreamt of as soon as he laid eyes on Kyoko now looks much more realistic. Of course, there's another 56 episodes after this one, but the 3-step plan set from episode 1 will pay off in a major way. Step 1. Good school. Work your ass off and study as much as it takes to get into a good school. But don't forget to enjoy yourself, spending time with those around you if you need a break. Because the better you feel, the easier it is to reach that school, and the higher the chance of reaching Step 2. Good job. Get a good job with the skills you learn to make as much money as you can, while making sure the job you want will make you happy. Because the better you feel, the easier the work gets, and the higher the chance of reaching Step 3. Good life. Use the money you made and the relationships you formed to enjoy life as much as possible. Take risks and put yourself out there, and even if it doesn't pan out the first, second, or even 8th try, the hard work and dedication you put in will pay off. That's it for the video. Hope you guys enjoyed. I don't even know if there's anyone watching this right now. First video on this channel, first anime video I've ever made. I don't even know if this is good or not, so please let me know what I can improve on in the comments. I've made gaming videos for years now, so going from that to this is a pretty big jump, but hopefully I'll get used to it sooner than later. But again, thank you if you've made it this far. Thank you for clicking on the video in the first place, giving me a chance and all. And yeah, with all that being said, like the video if you liked it, dislike if you disliked it, subscribe if you're new, and above all else, thank you for watching.